Okay, learning target 4 is solving multi-step inequalities, and there's not really any prep work for solving this because we're just going to take everything that we've learned from adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, and we also have to make sure we keep in mind the rules for multiplying and dividing by a negative number. And we're just going to put all that together into one inequality. So we're just going to start this off with some examples. So for the first example, using more than one step, this is actually a two-step inequality, and we need to analyze what's going on with the inequality so we know where to start in order to solve it. So I'm going to rewrite this problem: 9 plus 4t greater than 21. And what you need to do, just like when we were solving equations, so this would be a good review if you were still kind of shaky on solving equations, you always solve for your variable doing the order of operations backwards. So for example, if I go to my variable, let's see what all is happening to this variable. Well, the first thing I see happening is I'm multiplying by a positive 4. So that's what the plus sign, I know it's an addition sign, but it also represents that this is a positive 4. So I'm multiplying by a positive 4, and then what I'm doing is I am actually adding a 9. This is understood to be a positive 9. So first thing I'm doing is multiplying by 4, and then I'm taking care of this plus 9. So in order to solve this, I've got to think backwards. So that means I'm going to start with my 9. Now the inverse of this positive 9, remember it's understood to be positive because there's not a sign there. The inverse of a positive 9 is a negative 9, which also means subtraction. 9 minus 9 gives you 0, and that's what we want. Now if I subtract 9 from the left-hand side, I have to make sure I come over and subtract 9 from the right-hand side of our inequality symbol. Make sure you keep it balanced. 9 minus 9 gives us 0, and I'm left with a positive 4t. Now we don't have to write the plus sign because it's understood, but a positive 4t. And 21 minus 9 gives us 12. Now as far as what the inequality symbol should be, what we've learned about adding and subtracting numbers to either side of our inequality symbol, it does not affect the symbol at all. So that's going to remain a greater than sign. And then we're down to just a one-step inequality. I am currently multiplying t by 4. The reason I know that is because they're side by side. I could put a dot there. That indicates multiplication when they're side by side. So the inverse of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide this side by 4. I'm going to go over and divide the right-hand side by 4. 4 divided by 4 gives me 1, so I'm left with my positive 1t. And 12 divided by 4 is 3. Now, we need to determine what will my inequality symbol be. Well, what I've learned is that if I divide or multiply either side by a positive number, these are positives, it will not affect my inequality symbol. So that's going to stay greater than. So t is greater than 3. Those are my solutions. Now it does tell me to check the solutions. I don't actually have to graph this. So what you want to do is you just want to pick some numbers that are greater than 3, and let's see if they work. So first number I think of is 4. So I'm just going to go back to my original problem. 9 plus 4, and I'm going to plug in 4. 4 is greater than 3, so that's why I'm going to use that one. It's greater than 21. Well, following order of operations, I would have to take care of 4 times 4 first, which would give me a 16. Still have 21 on the right-hand side. And 9 plus 16 is 25. Is 25 greater than 21? And yes, it is. Therefore, 4 works. Therefore, I have the correct solution. Now, another good practice for you is if you try something that's actually less than 3 and plug that in. So I'm going to just show you on this problem. 0 is less than 3, and that's always an easy number to multiply by. So I'm going to pick 0 and see if it makes this inequality true. 4 times 0, following order of operations, is 0. And 9 plus 0 is 9. Is 9 greater than 21? And this is actually false. So I cannot use 0. 0 does not work. And 0 is not greater than 3. So this just proves to me that my inequality symbol is correct. All right, so for your turn question, I would like for you to copy down this inequality, solve it for A. Be very careful, make sure you follow all of your rules for solving inequalities, specifically the multiplication and division ones, and then check your solutions. Make sure that what you have does in fact work in your original inequality. All right, so we've got some practice with some 2 steps. So let's look at actually writing and solving an inequality. So what we have here, I've already started looking at this problem, so we'll talk about these pieces here in just a minute. But what we have here is a garden. This is your friend's garden, and it's fenced. You can see the fence around the garden. This is your garden. And what you want to do is you want to have a fence as well. So let's read through here. You want a fence in your vegetable garden. You want a fence in your vegetable garden, and it's adjacent to your friend's garden. Adjacent means side by side, so you got to know what those vocabulary words mean. Side by side, which you can see that this illustration gives you a picture side by side. Now, if this word problem did not give you a picture, my suggestion would be to draw a rectangle to represent your friend's garden, and then draw a rectangle to represent your garden to start filling in the pieces. But they have given that to you here. Now, you have at most 42 feet of fence. So what we need to do is I'm going to actually highlight that because this is all I've got. At most 42 feet of fencing. Now think about what that means if you were going to fence in your own yard. And I told you you have at most 42 feet. Can you use 44 feet of fencing? Well, the answer to that's no, because if you don't have 42, if you have at most 42, that's the most you can use. Now, could you use just, say, 38 feet? Yes, you can. As long as you don't go over that 42 feet of fencing, you can use any amount from under that. So we're going to need to know that. That's part of analyzing. What does at most tell me about my problem? Now, one thing that you have in this picture that they didn't actually give you in the word problem is that one side of your garden is actually going to be 12 feet because it's adjacent to your friend's side. So since theirs is 12, yours will also be 12. Well, now we got to pull in some prior knowledge of things that you should know about rectangles. If this side is 12, where else in this picture will be 12? Well, it's going to be the other side of your garden. So we can fill in the 12 here for this side of the garden. We know it's going to be 12 feet here. Now, it does ask us in that last part, what are the possible lengths? What are the possible lengths? That's what they want us to find, the possible lengths. We don't know them. So if you don't know something, what do you make it? Well, we make it a variable. So I'm going to use x. You could use L since it's talking about lengths, but I'm going to use x. Now, x represents the length of just your garden. We're not worried about everyone else's. This is just your garden. So if this side of your garden is x, what does that make this side of your garden? Well, knowing what we know about rectangles, opposite sides are the same length, so that means this side will also be x. Now, we are fencing. We're talking about putting a fence around the edge of your garden. So what vocabulary term do we use when we talk about the edge of our shapes? And we're talking about perimeter. We need to know the perimeter of our garden to know if we have enough fencing or to know how long our garden is allowed to be with the amount of fencing we've been given. So, how do you find perimeter? Well, most people will say add all the sides. And that's actually what I'm going to do just to kind of keep you in line here. Another form would be to double your length. So I could double 12 because 12 plus 12 is 24. And if you double 12, you also get 24. And you double your length. So you would double your width and double your length. Either way you would like to solve this, that's up to you. I am just going to add all these pieces together so that we can get practice in combining like terms. So my perimeter is 12 plus x plus the next 12 plus that last length of x. So I've added all four of my sides. Now it's not going to equal 42. It doesn't say to equal 42. It says at most 42. So I'm going to put my 42 down here, but I got to figure out what inequality symbol does that represent, at most. And we just talked about how at most means I can't go over 42. I don't have more than 42. This cannot be more than 42. The most this can be is 42, but it can't be more than 42. But could we use, say, 38? And we can. So that means that whatever the lengths are of my garden, when I add all of this together, it can equal 42, because I could make it exactly 42 if that's possible, or it has to be less than 42. I cannot go over the 42, so it's either going to be right at 42 or less than 42. So analyzing what at most means. All right, so let's collect our like terms. I'm going to go to my variables first. I have a positive 1x and a positive 1x, or positive 1x plus 1x. So I have two x's. Then I have a 12 plus a 12. Both of them positive, adding them together, that's plus 24, less than or equal to 42. All right, so two-step inequality now that we've combined our like terms. The inverse of adding 24 would be to subtract 24. Remember, do the order of operations in reverse. 24 minus 24 gives me 0. So I'm left with my positive 2x. And then 42 minus 24 leaves us with 18. We've subtracted a number on both sides. This is not a negative necessarily. Well, it is a negative 24, but I'm not multiplying or dividing by a negative 24. I'm actually just subtracting 24 from both sides. So that will not affect my inequality symbol. And then the inverse operation of multiplying by 2 is dividing by 2. Now I'm moving along through this problem with the understanding that you know how to solve two-step equations and therefore knowing how to solve two-step inequalities. So if you're still not sure where I'm getting some of this, you need to back up and look at some other videos or come see your teacher. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. That leaves me with my positive 1x. And 18 divided by 2 is 9. Now both of these 2's are positive. I divided both sides by a positive, so it will not affect my inequality symbol. And that's my answer. Those are all my solutions, x less than or equal to 9. But one thing that we've talked about already is when you solve a word problem, you have to explain what this is. Now, I didn't actually define my variable by writing out x represents length, but I did define it within my picture. So we know x represents the length of our garden, but we need to know what does this inequality actually tell us about the length. So what we have here is length must be 9, and let's use our units. We're talking about feet in this problem. 9 feet or less. 9 feet or less. So when you're creating your garden here, you cannot go over 9 feet. Your garden can only be 9 feet, or you can make it less than that, which means you would use less than 42 feet of your fencing. But you cannot make it 10, 11, 12 feet, because if you make it more than 9, you're not going to have enough fencing. So the length must be 9 feet or less. This is what our inequality tells us about our word problem. All right, so let's take setting up this inequality and solving it and apply that to your problem 2. Read through that, copy it down if you need to. Draw yourself a picture, especially for this one, because it doesn't have one, so it may be easier for you to visualize what it is that it's asking you for. And then set up your inequality and solve it. All right, so we've solved some multi-step, we've set up and solved some multi-step inequalities. So let's look at a few more examples. This one deals with the distributive property, and we all know how to distribute, so this should be pretty easy. But we just want to be very careful, making sure we all follow the correct procedures with distributive property and solving our multi-step inequalities. So when I look through here, of course it tells me distributive property, so I know already what to do, but I need to look for parentheses if I'm not given this type of direction. So I do see a set of parentheses, and I see the 3 on the outside. When the 3 is attached to the parenthesis, that indicates multiplication. It also indicates distributive property. Well, when you distribute, what operation are you using? You're using multiplication. So let's distribute our 3 in. 3 times t is 3t, and 3 times 1, and this is a positive 1, so 3 times a positive 1 is a positive 3. I still have my minus 4t, and ask yourself, why do I not distribute that 3 to the negative 4t? It is not inside the parenthesis. You cannot distribute to this because it is not inside the parenthesis, so be very careful with that. Greater than or equal to negative 5. Alright, so like we had on the last problem, the word problem, combining like terms, always look to see if you have like terms on one or both sides of your inequality symbol. And in this case, on the left-hand side of the symbol, I have a positive 3t and a negative 4t. Well, I can read this just from left to right like I would. Pretend like this isn't there. This would say 3t minus 4t. Because they're on the same side, I just need to subtract them. 3t minus 4t. 3 minus 4. Negative 1t. And if you need to put that 1 in there, please write that, but it's not necessary. And then I still have my plus 3. I haven't done anything with that yet, and there's nothing else over here to combine it with. Greater than or equal to negative 5. Now this appears to look to be a one-step inequality, and a lot of people will make that mistake, but what you have to be careful of is not only do I have this plus 3, but I have this negative 1 in front of this t here. So I actually have two different things I have to get rid of. Now this negative 1 is attached by multiplication, so I'm going to leave that till the last. I have a plus 3 here. This is what I have to do first. So the inverse of adding 3 is subtracting 3. 3 minus 3 gives us the 0 we need, and we're left with our negative 1t greater than or equal to, now careful, you should be able to do this without a calculator, down 5, you go down 3 more. If you're talking about a ball game, that means you're down 8. You haven't gone up in points, you've gone down in points. So negative 5 minus 3 is negative 8. Notice my sign has not changed because all I've been doing here, I just collected like terms. And for this step, I just subtracted on either side. So it has not affected our inequality symbol. But now we have a negative 1 more specifically. And it's attached to this t by multiplication. So the inverse of multiplying by negative 1 would be to divide by negative 1. Now what I do to one side, I must do to the other. Now, a negative divided by a negative is going to give me a positive. 1 divided by 1 is 1. 1t. That's what I need, a positive 1t. Now over here I have a negative 8 divided by a negative 1. Negative divided by a negative is a positive. So positive 8. But I have divided both sides by a negative. So if I divide both sides by a negative, I must reverse my inequality symbol. So I have to flip that. So those are the solutions. Pick a number, plug it in. Let's see if it works. T less than or equal to 8. Let's pick a number less than 8. And again, 0 is less than 8. So I'm going to go to 0 just because it's easy to plug in place of t. It's less than 8, so this should work. If we've done everything correct with our problem, 0 should work because it's less than 8. So following order of operations, 0 plus 1 is 1. So I have 3 times 1 minus 4 times 0. Notice all I did was parentheses. I just did the addition problem in the parentheses. All right. Multiplication, 3 times 1 is 3. Negative 4 times 0 is 0. That could be a plus 0 or a minus 0 there. It's not going to change your problem. Greater than or equal to negative 5. And then finally, 3 plus 0 is 3. Greater than or equal to negative 5. True or false? And 3 is indeed greater than negative 5. So that means 0 works when you plug it in for t, which means our inequality is correct. Alright, so distributive property. I want you to do your turn problem 3. Just kind of as a heads up here, you are distributing a 2, but more specifically, you are distributing a negative 2. So be very, very careful with this question. But distribute that in and solve that inequality for m. Alright, now let's look at inequalities that have variables on both sides. Again, very similar to equations. We just have to be careful with our multiplication and division of negative numbers. So let's look at this one. 6n minus 1 greater than 3n plus 8. Alright, well, have a 6n on the left-hand side. I've got a 3n on the right-hand side. So I can't just put them together because they are separated by the inequality symbol. So when we were solving equations, my suggestion was always to move the smaller variable to the larger variable. And the reason why is to help eliminate dealing with negative numbers so much. And in inequalities, that's going to be helpful because then hopefully you won't miss your answers or miss the solutions because of the inequality symbol. So if we look at this, I have a 6n and a 3n. So clearly 3 is my smallest variable, smallest coefficient. So I'm going to move this positive 3n to the positive 6n. Well, how do I move a positive 3n? Now, don't say divide. That would break apart these two. And I don't want to break them apart. I want to leave them together right now because I want to move them both together as one over here. So the inverse of a positive, and it's understood to be positive, 3n is a negative 3n. So notice that I subtracted 3n from this side and I subtracted 3n from this side. So let's actually subtract. 6n minus 3n leaves me with 3n. I still have my minus 1. Still have my greater than sign because I've just subtracted. That's all I've done. 3n minus 3n gives me 0. And then I'm left with a positive 8. So I don't have to put that plus sign because that's understood to be positive 8. And now I'm just down to a two-step inequality. So what's the first thing we're going to do? Well, the inverse of subtracting 1 is to add 1. So this gives me 0. That's the reason we do the inverse there. So 3n is greater than 8 plus 1 is 9. And 3 is attached to n by multiplication. And so now, since we have the n by itself on this side, or we will have it by itself, we need to go ahead and break these apart. So the inverse of multiplying by 3 would be to divide by 3. Notice I'm dividing both sides by a positive number, so it will not affect my inequality symbol. So n is greater than 3. There are my solutions. So let's pick a number that's greater than 3. I'm going to pick 5. Just because that's the number that came to my head. So I'm going to put 5 in place of n. First of all, 5 is greater than 3. That's the reason why I could pick that. But in my original inequality, I'm going to put 5 in place of n and check my answer. Now, notice I'm doing all this without a calculator. I am just simplifying this following order of operations. I know that you can type this in your calculator and quickly get the solutions for either side. Just be very, very careful if that's what you're doing. Now, 6 times 5 gives me 30. I have minus 1. Greater than 3 times 5 gives me 15. Still have my plus 8. 30 minus 1, that's easy, 29. Greater than 15 plus 8 is 23. Is 29 greater than 23? And that is true. Therefore, 5 works when you substitute it in for n, so our solutions are correct. Alright, so your turn, problem 4. Same thing, variables on both sides. You can move whichever one you want first. That's completely up to you. Just keep in mind that oftentimes most times if you will move the smaller number to the larger number, it will eliminate having to deal with negatives. So copy that down and solve that problem. Alright, let's look at some other inequalities that we've actually looked at these same types of special solutions with our equations, but now we're going to look at how do they look with our inequalities. So we're just going to focus on 5a first. Let's just do that one. Alright, this is a combination of distributive property, variables on both sides. We have a lot going on in just this one inequality. So let's go ahead and do the distributive property first, since we do have these parentheses. So this side, 10 minus 8a, doesn't have anything for us to do. There's no like terms, there's no distributive property, there's nothing. So we're going to leave it alone, and we have the greater than or equal to. But I am going to distribute the 2 in. So 2 times 5 is 10. And 2 times negative 4a. So you do have to make sure you carry the sign. So 2 times negative 4a gives us a negative 8a. Now some of you all may look at this and say, oh, I noticed something, and that's great. And maybe you can come up with the answer. So let's check and see if you're right. Others of you may need to take this another step further. Now, normally I say move the smaller to the larger. Well, if you notice, this is a negative 8a, this is a negative 8a. They're exactly the same, so it doesn't really matter where you start. What's the inverse of a negative 8a? And that's a positive 8a, so plus 8a. So let's see what happens. Got my 10. Negative 8a plus 8a is 0. So all I have is 10 over there. Greater than or equal to, still have my 10 on this side. Negative 8a plus 8a, again, is 0. So this is what I have. Well, this isn't my answer. I don't have a is greater than or equal to something. I don't have what a can be. I have a true statement. 10 is greater than or equal to 10. That is true. However, those are not my solutions. 10 will work, but that's not my solutions. Anytime that you have a true statement, you've lost your variables, that's one way to think of it, and you've been left with a true inequality statement, then we will say our solutions are all real numbers. So if you were answering this question and I ask you to box in your answer, this is actually what you're going to box in. All real numbers. Not the 10 greater than or equal to 10. That's not the solution. That just tells us that since no matter what I do, I'm going to get a true statement, then I can use any number I want. So all real numbers. When we did this with equations, we would get something like 10 equals 10. And we talked about how that was an identity, and it was infinitely many solutions, or all real numbers. So the same thing goes for inequalities, if it's a true statement. So let's look at 5b. 5b, let's solve this one. Well, first of all, we don't have a distributive property because we do not have any parentheses. 6m minus 5, there's nothing going on this side, so I'm going to leave it as 6m minus 5 greater than, but if I look at the right hand side, I got a 7m and a negative m. Remember, this is a negative 1m if you need to add the 1. Well, since they're on the same side, I can just combine like terms. What is 7m minus 1m? Well, 7 minus 1 is 6 m's plus 7. And again, some of you are probably looking at this and you know, oh, I know what's going on, I know what to do, and that's fantastic. Others, again, take it a step further if you need to. Both of these are 6 m's. Doesn't matter which one I move. The inverse of a positive 6m would be a negative 6m. So I'm going to subtract 6m from both sides. 6m minus 6m, 0. So I have a negative 5 left there, and I still have my greater than sign. 6m minus 6m, again, that is 0, and I'm left with a positive 7. So I'm left with negative 5 greater than 7. Is that a true statement? And this is false. Negative 5 is not greater than 7. So since we are left with an incorrect inequality, a false inequality, then this is going to be no solution. Again, if I ask you to box in your answer, this is your answer, not negative 5 greater than 7. This just tells us that no matter what I plug in, I'm going to get a false statement. Nothing will work. So that's no solution. All right, so we've had several different examples of solving multi-step inequalities. So I would like for you, here's your summary questions. Question number 1, you've got 2 different inequalities to simplify, to solve. Notice that it does tell you if possible, and that means that one or both or some of these will maybe a no solution, so write no solution, or they may be all real numbers, so you write all real numbers. If you can solve it and actually get t and whatever the inequality will be, then that will be your solution. So 3 different types that you could see, but you only have 2 here to solve. And then for question 2, how can you tell me that this inequality has no solution just by looking at the terms? So think about how you could answer that one. So answer your summary questions and make sure you show all of your work.